Journey Through Parenthood with Martina Bills.
Brought to you by Southern Ohio Medical Center. Very good things are happening here.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Journey Through Parenthood on the WSAZ Now Desk. I'm Martina Bills. Well, it is flu season. It's cold season. It could be called COVID season. It's crud season. Those germs are everywhere, and kids are going to be out of school for some extended holiday breaks around groups of family and friends. So if your child is sick, how do you really know when you can help their symptoms at home, when you should get to the doctor, when you should get to an urgent care, and what really should spur you to take your child to the emergency room? We're talking to Dr. Corey Mitchell with Valley Health today a little bit about all of those things with some good pointers on how to treat your child at home before you have to take them into the doctor.
As a father myself, that's a question I'm faced with both in my personal day-to-day life as well as my professional life. And we are in that season. It is that time of year. We're seeing things like RSV, COVID, flu, as well as some of your more common cold viruses, things like rhinovirus, adenovirus. And so sometimes those symptoms can look very similar. And so we're looking at, most things, common things, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, cough, congestion. A lot of those things can be managed at home. Low-grade fever are things that we can treat with ibuprofen, Motrin, Tylenol, those kinds of things. When we start to get fevers that aren't responding to those over-the-counter therapies, when we start to see any kind of respiratory distress, that's concerning. Changes in mental status. So a kiddo who's gone from being very playful and energetic to also very lethargic are also signs that we might need to take a little closer look.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask. I know that I feel like those fevers always creep back up at bedtime, so it's evenings, offices are closed, or on the weekend. I swear my child only gets sick on the weekend when, your doctor is not really right there to answer those phone calls. When do you think it's actually a good time for a parent to actually kind of say, okay, I either need to call the pediatrician, call the family medicine doctor, or head to one of those urgent care type places?
Sure. So, fever that is not responding. So our typical approach again with ibuprofen, Motrin, Tylenol, those kinds of things. If we're dosing those and, within 15, 20, 30 minutes, you're not seeing that response, that certainly would warrant a little closer look. Again, if we're having any kind of respiratory distress, subtle signs that your child is having any issues with breathing. A lot of times, from a clinical standpoint, we look at things like what we call belly breathing or intercostal retractions, which we don't expect the untrained eye to necessarily be able to pick out. But we also look at things like nasal flaring. That can be indicators. But as a parent, if you notice your child is having any issues breathing, certainly would warrant investigation.
And is that kind of the same along the lines of heading to the dreaded ER? Because you always hear those stories about wait times, and you never want to take anyone to the ER unless it's absolutely necessary, whether they're, a baby or an older person. Is that kind of go along the same lines with those kind of symptoms?
Absolutely. So we try to, ideally, we want to avoid those ER visits. The ER is, as the name implies, we want to reserve that for emergencies. Those folks are very, very busy, and ideally, we don't want to impede what they're trying to do with emergencies by bogging them down with our common cold stuff. And so, yeah, absolutely, the common things, the cough, the congestion, even fever. If it's not a high fever and it's responding, those are not things that we necessarily need to go run off to the ER for. Those are things that if they're persistent and you've got questions, absolutely warrants seeing your pediatrician or even an urgent care setting. But not until we kind of cross over into those fevers that are not responding to our what we would refer to as conservative management, or we're seeing those signs of respiratory distress, or certainly the mental status changes, things like lethargy, very somnolent, just not very active. Those are the situations where then we would cross that threshold of urgent care evaluation to a point where maybe we need to consider the ER.
Okay. And I know this year coming up on the holiday season, family gatherings, group settings, coughing, sneezing, runny nose, those kind of things can really be contagious in the sense that when you're all together and then a week later everyone's sick. What's a common practice as we just need to kind of keep in mind at this time of year to kind of keep everyone healthy as much as we can at least?
Yes, absolutely. And there's a lot to that question. Number one, if there's any indication, whether it's your child or yourself, that you may have an illness going on, obviously we're going to recommend that you stay out of the company of others, right? That'd be the quickest way to spread that is simply being around others. We talk a lot with our kiddos about hand hygiene, and quite frankly, it's not just our kids. I mean, that goes across the board to our adults as well. Practicing good hand hygiene is a great way to reduce that spread. Of course, when we're looking at more serious things like COVID, there still are those practices in place depending on the situation for things like masking and quarantining and whatnot. So we need to be following those kinds of measures as well. But those are general practices that we want to stress for folks.
And I know that when it comes to kids, parents are busy. Everyone has schedules they're trying to follow. And when a kid is sick, parent might have to call off work. And I know it gets frustrating. But what are some of those practices to really make sure that those sick kids aren't going to school or daycare and spreading it if they can, to make sure you don't send your kids back to school or daycare too quickly?
Yes, absolutely. So, I think that's obviously where our pediatricians, our urgent care offices come into play. And our general rule of thumb that we want to follow is being fever-free 24 hours. And the key there is without any treatment. So, if you're fever-free 24 hours, but you've had to give ibuprofen, Motrin, Tylenol, something of that nature, that's generally not what we're looking for. We want that fever-free 24 hours without treatment. And generally, we want to see symptoms improving, and that's when we start to look at the option for return to daycare, return to school, return to work.
So a lot of good reminders from Dr. Corey Mitchell with Valley Health. One of those hygiene practices he says to make sure to keep in mind during the holiday season of those family gatherings, to wash the hands, and if you are sick, maybe not go to those family gatherings. And always remember, if your child has a fever, you should not be sending them back to school or daycare or any activities until they're fever-free for 24 hours, which means fever-free without any medicine. So a lot of good information here on Journey Through Parenthood. If you ever want to reach out to me with a story idea, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we are here on the WSAZ Now Desk every Monday and Wednesday at 10 o'clock. We hope you have a great rest of your day.